Welcome to 2020 Politics War Room with James Carville in New Orleans. I'm Al Hunt here in Washington at American University, where we're proud partners with the Sign Institute. We have so much to talk about today as the Democratic presidential nomination appears to maybe be heading to a conclusion very soon. We also have a really great guest. But let me first ask you to please subscribe to 2020 Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Hey, James, with yesterday's results, I think this presidential nominating race for the Democrats is virtually over. Something unforeseen, I suppose, could happen in the next 6 months. We can't see now. But it's Biden v. Trump, but let's get ready to rumble. That was a landslide win for Joe Biden yesterday. Big margins, South, Midwest, even out West. Delegate lead is significant. But, you know, it's going to get even bigger next week if Bernie should decide to stay in. 577 delegates in Florida, Ohio, Illinois, Arizona, and Joe is favored in all of them, and a massive win in Florida. I think the only question is now is if and when Bernie gets out.
Yeah, I mean, it's 99 to 1 on 538 because it just don't do 100 to nothing. All right, it doesn't. Anything is, 99 to 1. You're gonna get struck by a meteor and die. So, it's decided.
99 to 1 for Bernie to win.
Yeah, but 99 to 1 for him to get the nomination against. All right. To what avail? The Democratic voters have spoken loudly, clearly. They've spoken from every region. It's unmistakable. They want to get on to November. And there's nothing to accomplish here. Nothing. And I see where Senator Sanders is in Vermont, and I'm sure that he's meeting and considering his options. But, I just say, I think he is, and it's been pointed out, he is a small D Democrat. And if you're a small D Democrat, you got to say, this is the will of the people. And I respect that. And we got to move on.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And let's us move on now. Let's talk about 6.5 months of Biden v. Trump. I mean, what are the challenges for Joe Biden right now? This Trump attack is going to be vicious, James. I mean, they're already, coming back. They're going to have hearings on the Hill about the Hunter Biden controversy, and Trump has suggested that Biden is senile. It's going to be vicious. So what are Joe's challenges now?
First of all, part of his challenge is to understand that this country is ready for a change. So therefore, his campaign slogan should be Joe Biden, because it's time for a change. And just leave it at that. Now, Trump is, the thing about Biden is he's so well known and people know who he is. And yes, Trump is going to come after him every which kind of way you can do it. The campaign is totally caught off guard by this, as anyone would beat it, and they're just getting geared up. And they need to stop running in these primaries and start building a campaign here for the general election. And that's going to take some time. And the sooner they can turn to that effort, the better off it's going to be. But yes, they're going to get the Trump people are going to come back like crazy. They're going to Hunter Biden. They're going to call him all kind of names. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. But remember, the other side gets to play. And, Biden can't, they can be smart about how to go back at Trump. But the country does not want to reelect Trump. That is just as clear as you can imagine it. And generally, when people don't want to do something, they look for an excuse to do that which they don't want to do. And, Trump's just, he's caged. They're all scared, as they should be. This thing is going very poorly for them. And there's a real good chance that he's just going to lash back so hard and so panic himself that he actually hurts himself beyond the 42% he's got now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do think on the Hunter Biden, and let's just, in summary, this is very easy to summarize. Hunter Biden worked for a Ukrainian energy company. He was on the board. He had no qualifications whatsoever. If his name had been Hunter Smith, he never would have had that job. It was wrong. It should have been stopped. Joe Biden not only did not do anything wrong, he did everything right. These are two separate issues. He went and he really forced the Ukrainians to crack down on corruption, got rid of a bad prosecutor, and I don't know, family reasons. His son, the golden boy, Bo, was dying. But they'll come after him. They'll have hearings in the Hill. There'll be fake documents. And I think a key, and I remember going to a dinner once with Pete Buttigieg, and he was asked how he would handle Trump. And he said, sometimes you just have to treat him as the crazy uncle in the closet. And I think Joe needs a little bit of discipline in this. He doesn't have to lash back at every one of Trump's crazy vitriolic attacks.
Yeah, I think so. And, the campaign has got to, they need to get some good surrogates and train them and get them out there. Look, what happened here is something so remarkable in American politics. So this race is like literally stuck in neutral. And it's going, and Bernie's doing well, and Mayor Pete did well in Iowa, and, going on, and in Nevada.
Elizabeth had her time.
And all of a sudden, you have South Carolina, and the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. And he wins South Carolina by a huge margin, and then 72 hours later, he just blows the hinges off of the Virginia Democratic primary, in particular Northern Virginia. Joe Biden didn't have a single volunteer, not a bumper sticker, not a yard sign, not a phone call, not anything. Once these suburban women saw that that's who people were voting for, they came and came and came. And there's a very good Tim Alberta piece in Politico magazine about Livingston County, Michigan, which is a affluent and hardcore Republican county, kind of between Detroit and Ann Arbor and Lansing. They had an increase in turnout of 56%. People, if Biden can just stay focused and just run an okay campaign, the Democrats are going to win everything. Everything.
Yeah, it's a national. Joe Biden can run a national campaign, and he's not going to win Alabama, but Doug Jones, the senator down there, won't have to run away from him. And conversely, I'll give you $10, James, every time that Susan Collins appears with Donald Trump. When it comes to a national campaign, edge Democrats.
I'd only put it 75% that she's going to run. She's going to lose. I mean, you can just feel this thing coming, man. You can say, well, one poll has it 52 to 46 or something. That doesn't matter. You could feel it coming in 81. In 80. You could feel it coming in 08. You could feel it coming in 08, and you feel it coming now. I guess after the convention, you could feel it coming in 92. But this is a big wave forming out there, and the only thing that was going to stop it is if we did something stupid in our nominating process, and we did not do that. And I think that, it's just look at the turnout, look at what's happening. And these women, it's staggering. We saw it in New Hampshire. We saw it in South Carolina. We saw it in Virginia. We're seeing it in Michigan. Come on, guys.
He's doing well. He's doing well across the board, with the exception of young voters, and they usually they have turnout problems anyway. But he is winning African Americans by huge margins. Bernie Sanders isn't even going to get the 15% threshold in Mississippi. And he is combining that with great showings in the suburbs, which were what made 2018 the big Democratic year that it was. Everything is there for Joe Biden.
It is, and honestly, this is a kind of thing where when you make pancakes, you don't overbeat the batter. All right, you just as soon as everything gets wet, you stop. All right,
I'll trust you on that one.
That's the rule of making pancakes. They don't need to overbeat the batter. All right, this is a situation where don't just stand there, do nothing. I'm being somewhat facetious here, but less is more here, guys. Less is more. Less on the schedule, less big kind of events and that kind of stuff, and just be Joe Biden, time for a change guy. And people are just. They're locked and loaded, man. They're ready to come out and vote. I promise you.
Yeah, and I think one advantage that he will have now, which wasn't apparent a while back, was when he campaigns a lot, when he has a hectic schedule, he sometimes makes mistakes. I guess a lot of people do. It's not just unique to Joe Biden. But one thing he's not going to have to do in the next couple of months is all of that fundraising that people thought he was going to have to. He's going to have to do some, but Mike Bloomberg is going to pour $1 billion in this campaign. Joe will raise a lot now that he's a winner, but that Trump money advantage has just been neutralized, and the technology advantage may be mostly neutralized, and that'll make a.
We got to do a show on that. We got to get someone.
Yeah, you know why I worry about that, James? I worry about that. I think that the software, the technology, the things they have. I think what I understand, what Bloomberg has, is as good as what Trump has. The advantage that Trump has is that on places like Facebook, what really attracts clicks, viewers, whatever, is the incendiary stuff, the really angry, mean, often racist stuff. And he does that, and I don't know how you counter that. And Facebook isn't willing to take down stuff that's clearly false. So he does have that advantage. That's a challenge. But I think money wise, and as far as identifying voters, I think the Democrats will be playing on an even playing field.
I hope so. And I know money wise we will be on an even playing field, and. I think you're going to start seeing a lot of pressure on the Republicans between Biden. I mean, when they started, 6 weeks ago, they were looking really good. And now, between Biden emerging as a dominant front runner, okay, I mean, a really dominant front runner, and unfortunately, this virus, they've been good reason to be concerned. I mean, and if you're a Democrat, you don't kid yourself. You got to. We can do it, but you got to lose this one. You got to try.
Yeah,
it's going to take some effort.
Oh, yeah, no question. I mean, it's just amazing that if you look back 5 weeks ago, Republicans were cocky. The Democrats were going to have a long, protracted battle. Bernie might be the nominee. The economy is humming. Trump has been cleared, if you will, or at least he was not cleared, but he was not found guilty of as he should have been for an impeachable offense. And they were just riding high. Wow, 6 weeks. Now, James, here's my caveat. Here's what scares me a little bit. Static analysis has been wrong for the last year.
I'm not engaged. So you've noticed I haven't engaged much of it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think things look awfully good for the other side today. But I there's still a little bit of a worry there.
There should be. There's more than a little bit of worry. I just think that the Biden campaign needs to be smart. They need to limit the events. It's okay, that the enthusiasm is out there. You don't have to, it just they can raise some money, but with this virus thing coming up, there's not much they're going to be able to do anyways. Which is, I mean, you don't want, they really got to take careful that he does not get sick.
Yeah, no, it really is a big issue, and he ought to be, very careful. And when Trump calls him senile, which he really has, and he says, he forgets names and places, my God, Trump forgets 10 times more, except, 100-fold more he lies about him. So it's not exactly his strong point.
Right. They got a tape of 100 things as Trump slurring words and saying he's in the wrong place and not knowing what he's talking about. I mean, I think that the more that Biden, let's see, the question is, do you engage that, or do you say this is just the same thing you've been seeing for 4 years in American politics? I'm really running, because I think we can do better than this. I really do.
Yeah, it goes back to the point you made a few minutes ago. Surrogates ought to take on that responsibility, and he ought to channel a little bit about what Pete Buttigieg says, treat him as the crazy uncle in the closet, because that's what he is.
What they don't have that I know of is they don't have like a person that goes out and represents them. or a team of people that go
James,
out.
James, I know a little bit about this. They had people who did this, but that campaign, Chris Dodd and John Kerry and others, that campaign was so disorganized back in Iowa and in New Hampshire, you didn't know about them. At one point, one of them showed up in Iowa and said, "Where should I go?" Biden people said, "Beats us," but that's changed.
Yeah, I guess it's changing but it just goes to show you what a historic time that the Democratic Party's in. And I can assure you of this, and the one single thing that I have been consistently right about since this started is they just want to win. I mean, everything came down to, all got winnability and the Medicare for all. It was, some Democrats didn't like Medicare for all, but what they thought was that was a losing issue, that would hurt you in a general election. As soon as that got that, the whole thing was mildewed. You couldn't touch it. It was gone forever. And you hear this so much anecdotally is that, well, I don't vote for women, but I don't know if other women are going to vote for a woman or whatever. The people were so scared about anything that touched on beating Trump that just drove the entire campaign. It didn't matter how many position papers you put out. I don't think Biden had a position paper on anything. It didn't matter how many volunteers you had. It didn't even matter how many television spots you had. Once people had the sense that, hey, this person can get votes, and that's it, I'm out of here. Boom. And stunning.
No question. And it was, decades from now, maybe a century from now, political scientists and history will be writing about those 4 days. Unfortunately, it was both February and March, but those 4 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, South Carolina through Super Tuesday, we've never seen anything like it in American politics before.
And from me, who's made my living and known to be a campaign guy, the campaign didn't matter here.
Right.
It literally didn't matter.
Well, let me just say, I think Jim Clyburn deserves all the credit in the world. It was Jim Clyburn. I think Joe Biden deserves credit. But I'll tell you who deserves the lion's share of the credit for those 4 days: Donald J. Trump. This was, let's find a way to get rid of him.
Oh,
and
man.
Joe is the horse.
Yeah, they didn't care. It was, the Clyburn thing was just, he was like the lamplighter. We were all in the wilderness, not knowing where to go. And boy, somebody lit the lamp and everybody said, "Boop, let's go." And I think that was some of, Clyburn's moral authority in South Carolina. And, he had built up relationships, for his entire life. And the decency in which he endorsed Biden, who would have ever thought in politics that suburban women in Virginia would take their cue from African American voters in South Carolina? But that has happened, ladies and gentlemen. We are living history right now. History I never thought I'd see.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I also think, look, there's some difficult people in the Sanders wing, the Bernie Bros. But I think whatever bitterness existed in this is going to really not be that difficult to people. Some of them will walk because that's what they are. But I think there have been some very divisive. I actually think this is less divisive in the end, or will be by the time you get to the Milwaukee convention, than it was 4 years ago.
So Ed Kilgore, who's a really smart guy, we should have him on a show at some point, pointed out that right now, Bernie and Joe Biden are more popular among Democrats than Donald Trump was among Republicans at a comparable time in 2016. Right? The party is not very divided. Right? It's really not. The party kind of likes both, and if they just handle this with minimal political skill, it might entail Biden going to Vermont, right, and saying, we're together. There's a good chance if everybody acts, in a way that we want to win, that we can come out of this thing not just okay, but pretty doggone good. Because the Democrats are pretty united, and I don't think the problem that Bernie's going to have going on is the party wants to unite. They're not interested anymore. It's just not the same world. And he's got to make he's got to figure the world. If he goes back on a campaign trail, there's not going to be the world like he came off of. And I think he understands that.
Yeah. James, I hate to even ask this question, but it's the favorite of all pundits and even some politicos now. And a lot of trees will unnecessarily be cut down and a lot of hot air wasted on broadcast venues about who's Joe going to pick as his running mate. I don't think any presidential candidate in my memory has had any idea in March who they are going to pick. I buy into the conventional wisdom. I think he's likely to pick a woman. But other than that, I think it's fun speculation. It really is, and makes for great cocktail chatter. But, nobody knows.
No, I do think that he's going to pick a woman.
Yeah, I do too.
And just because I don't know that the average female voter really cares. They just want to get Trump out of there. All right, I don't know that, but it's just we should. I mean, what the party is about, and if you don't, it'll be nothing but stories about it's all men. So I presumably he will, but there's a lot. I mean, how they handle this process, how they drag it out, how they make the announcement. That the good thing about that occupies a lot of space, a lot of commentary, a lot of ink, a lot of everything. When you're not making gaffes, you're not out, getting confused where you are. Studying and interviewing candidates for vice president and everything. Your campaign is leaking, and you creating a narrative around this.
Yeah, and having the luxury of time is valuable. Trying to do it right as you're at wherever that convention site is usually produced a disaster. Witness Sarah Palin, and so you're right. It'll be fun to chatter about, but it won't. It'll happen. James, as I said, we are privileged to have with us John Barry, a great journalist, author. I remember his terrific book on Jim Wright and Newt Gingrich. I guess that was 30 years ago. God, am I old. But we're going to talk today about his classic influenza pandemic of 1918 that killed 50 million people. John, first of all, it's good to have you on. Thank you.
Well, happy to be here. A lot better than the alternative, as they say, all three of us.
Oh, wow, is that true? John, one of the mistakes that was made back in 1918 and 19 by both American leaders and European leaders was not leveling with the people, trying to underplay this terrible threat. Do you fear we're seeing a rerun of that today with Trump and coronavirus?
Well, clearly. You do have to distinguish between the White House and the rest of the administration, though. CDC tries to tell the truth, corrects the president. Tony Fauci tries to tell the truth, corrects the president. And, even Pence doesn't exactly correct the president, but when he makes a statement, it's, reasonably accurate. So it's just Trump and Hannity and, Rush. And the reality is it's not just bad politics, because it's going to come back and bite them. All it does is undermine their credibility, but it actually makes it more dangerous for everybody.
Well, we'll talk about that. I mean, talk about the analogy to 1918. What was done wrong then, and how did it inflame, exacerbate, and make the influenza worse?
Well, we were, of course, at war, and Wilson had one single focus, and that was winning the war and mobilizing the entire country, getting the entire country totally focused. So there was a context there that the influenza pandemic fell into, and the context was that you keep morale up, you only tell good news, you attack any negative thoughts. So when the pandemic came along, national public health leaders were saying, it was referred to as Spanish influenza, even though it didn't start in Spain. But it was, they said this is ordinary influenza by another name. The Surgeon General of the U.S. says you have nothing to fear if ordinary precautions are taken. And those precautions included things like opening your bowels regularly. At the same time, this disease was lethal, considerably more lethal than coronavirus. And it could cause horrific symptoms. People could die in less than 24 hours. Some people were bleeding not only from their nose and mouth, but from their eyes and ears. The book, I quote a letter from a doctor to a colleague saying that people were turning so dark blue from lack of oxygen that he had difficulty distinguishing Caucasian troops from African American troops. That, of course, was spreading rumors of, the Black Death. And at the same time, the government is telling you, and local officials were echoing the national leaders on this. The Chicago Health Commissioner, for example, said nothing was done to interfere with the morale of the community. So people are hearing this stuff when they know perfectly well it's not ordinary influenza by another name. In fact, it was so bad, at one point when Philadelphia finally banned all public gatherings, including church services, closed saloons and theaters, and so forth. One of the newspapers even said, "This is not a public health measure. There is no cause for alarm." I mean, how stupid did they think people were? So people, very quickly lost all trust in authority, and they began to lose trust in each other. And society began to fray. There were reports of people starving to death because their neighbors, even family members, wouldn't bring them food. It got so bad that a sober, serious scientist, not given to overstatement, who had been dean of the University of Michigan Medical School before the war and was head of the Army's Communicable Disease Division during the war, said if the rate of acceleration continues a few more weeks, civilization could easily disappear from the face of the earth. That's how bad it got. We're not at that level here, but when you have something dangerous and you're being lied to, it's extremely alienating and isolating. You don't know where to turn. It becomes every person for himself or herself.
Boy, it sure does. James?
Yeah. So, John, let's just sort of fantasize it. But Vice President Pence calls you and he says, "John, look, as you can imagine, I'm having a difficult time here, but I'm convinced. What are the three things I need to do immediately?" What would you tell him?
Well, I would say, just get out front and say, look, this thing is coming. Whether it's in your community right now or not, it's going to get there. There are, and tell people what to expect, and you tell them what the government is going to do about it. You tell them what strategies are in place and why they're in place. You basically drown them in factual information. So they face reality. People can deal with the truth. I think, just telling someone to wash their hands is not adequate. For example, they say, okay, at least 20 seconds. How many people actually wash their hands for 20 seconds? And if they do it the first once, are they going to do it next week? In 2009, at the height of fear in Mexico City when swine flu first surfaced, the government urged people to wear masks on public transit and gave them out for free. Now, whether the masks do any good or not is a different issue, but the point is they were given for free and recommended highly, more than just recommended. So usage peaked at 65%. And 10 days after that, it was down to 10%. So it's not just a question of doing something, it's a question of doing something the right way every time, every day for a period of weeks. That's another part of the story that, we may or may not have to close all sorts of places. but you have to make it clear that these interventions have to be sustained. I mean, in SARS, for example, many healthcare workers died. It is hypothesized a lot of them died because they didn't take off their protective equipment properly. You know, there's a procedure to follow, and it has to be followed precisely every time, not most of the time, every time. It's a question of discipline, and these kinds of messages are not really being communicated. The expectations, they need to be set properly. You need to advise local public health leaders and state public health leaders what the triggers are to take particular actions. School closings is a lot more thought has to go into that, whether or not you do or do not want to close schools. Right now, I haven't enough data to figure out whether I personally would recommend them. They do put a stress on the community, but when you close them for a couple of weeks, what happens when you bring them back and somebody else has a case, which will happen? You're going to close them again for 2 weeks, or you're going to keep them closed for a month? There's very little data yet on if in influenza, in a serious influenza pandemic, definitely you would close schools because it is clear that children spread influenza. They're generally, could be super spreaders. It's not at all clear that that's the case here. Now, out of an abundance of caution, you might do that, but it'd be nice to have a lot more data before you recommend school closings in this disease. It's a different disease. But there are all sorts of things. And again, guidance for the local leadership as to timing. So, I mean, those are two of the keys: timing and sustained compliance with whatever is recommended. I mean, that earlier I had said that, Trump and Limbaugh and Hannity and so forth were dangerous. And the reason was a Trump supporter who listens to them is much less likely to comply with any guidance coming out of Tony Fauci, say, than would a Democrat, because the Trump supporter has been told this is all a sham. And that is not only dangerous to that individual, but it's dangerous to the community at large. So there are a couple of goals we need to set. For one thing, the most interesting and I think the most important number coming out of China, whatever the actual case fatality rate is, we know that in Wuhan, it's 5.8%. Outside, in the rest of the country, it's 0.7%. And the reason isn't because the medical care, the quality of the care is any different. The reason is Wuhan is overwhelmed. There were no intensive care unit beds available. And so people died. We need to stretch the pandemic out, and it is a pandemic, so that there will be beds available for people in intensive care units. We need an investment of dollars to get more intensive care unit beds. So on a short-term basis, that may be very difficult, may not be even possible. But there are a lot of things that can be done.
Well, yeah, of course there's. But one of the things that they were able to, at least according to the figures they have, it's in the press, South Korea and China were able to, the infection rates are going down, right? Can we do anything as draconian as their system? Is the South Korean system just different than ours, or are there things under our system we can do that at least they're stopping the spread of this thing?
Well, yeah, I don't think a free society would tolerate what's going on there. And in this case, the police state in China, Singapore is not a police state, but they've done an amazing job controlling it. Hong Kong has done well. I don't think you're going to get the kind of compliance and enforcement you get in the United States. Italy initially quarantined, a few towns, but that quarantine was a sieve. They've now, taken much more aggressive action over a much wider area, obviously. I don't have a lot of faith that that is going to be any more complete. Maybe it will be. In the United States, we are so far behind because of the testing fiasco. I mean, I know preparedness people I've talked to since this first surfaced, have been saying for weeks, that we should be testing much more widely. And we weren't doing it. And now the disease is seeded through in many parts of the country. Down here in Louisiana, we just now have, yesterday was supposedly our first case. Now there are 6. And, there are more out there probably. We can slow it down with isolation. I don't know that in our society with, different, 50 different state public health agencies without real authority from the federal government on them, I don't know that we'll be able to accomplish what they've accomplished in China. It would be great if we could, but I'm not optimistic. Even if we do, certainly this virus is circulating in areas of the world that basically have zero public health infrastructure or very weak, Africa and so forth. Indonesia, it's probably all over Indonesia, even though there aren't a heck of a lot of cases reported, but they had direct flights from Wuhan. So this virus is eventually going to reinfect even, China's very successful, let's say they do stamp it out, and let's say it does not surge back when they go back to work, which is very possible. Even the Chinese have been reasonably honest about that possibility. They are likely to be reinfected from the rest of the world eventually, as would the West be. So this virus is here to stay. Buying time is crucial, because the more time the longer you delay it, the closer we are to a vaccine or to drugs. I mean, that's one thing that is very promising here, is there do seem to be some drugs that may work against this. Not the case in influenza.
John, let me pick up on, I think your point is a very good one. We don't have a Chinese system. It's harder for us to do some of the things that they did, just mandatory shutdowns of people. But, if you had national leadership, even with our federalist system, I mean, I don't know if it's a good idea to close down sporting events or not, but I do know the NIH has recommended against anyone going to any event that involves more than 50 people for right now. Well, I mean, those sporting events contain a lot more than 50 people, and more than a few of them are...
Well, in 1919, they canceled the Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say more than a few of them are geezers like us who are most susceptible. If you had a president who said, I'm sorry, I love games, but this is a time now where you're not going to do that, that would make a difference.
Well, I agree with you on that. And, totally. And it would be great if he stood there with Nancy Pelosi and made statements like that.
He won't talk to her. He won't talk to her, John, about this because he's mad at her, they said.
I mean, I said earlier that Wilson had one single focus, and that was winning the war. As unfortunately, this president seems to have one single focus, and that's winning re-election, period. The fact is that what he is doing now is counterproductive, even in his own political self-interest. I'm astounded that he continues to do it, again, from the standpoint of his own political self-interest. Even Trump supporters have to recognize, as the cases in the United States mount, as, Merkel says 2/3 of Germans might get infected, that this is not a hoax. And that the case count isn't going to zero anytime soon. It just makes, I'm sure not only do you and I agree, I think, probably 99% of the Republicans in the Congress agree with that. It's just stupid.
So John,
and dangerous.
Tell me, how's John Barry? How are you dealing with this? What have you changed your habits or your lifestyle since today as opposed to where you were in January?
Well, I am aware of hand washing, and as I said, you have to do it for at least 20 seconds, scrub like a surgeon, and do it every time properly. That's one. Now, hand transmission of respiratory diseases is generally about, roughly 20% of respiratory diseases are transmitted hand to mouth or eyes or nose, when you go to your face. So that's not everything, even if you're completely successful. I can tell you that public restrooms are probably the most dangerous places. This is also not just a respiratory virus, but it does infect the gastrointestinal system. It's even been found in urine. I mean, people would laugh when you say this, but it's quite possible flatulence could expel virus. Public restroom, dangerous places, avoid them unless absolutely necessary. And if you're in one, absolutely be, washed. I mean, really scrub those hands. And then when you open the door, put, a couple of pieces of layers of paper towels. Of course, the automatic faucets in many public restrooms in modern buildings, you can't get any water out of them. Try getting a flow of water for 20 seconds under them. So and of course, I'm not going to NBA games. Not that I go very often anyway. Avoiding, the obvious stuff. It's not really in the community here yet, so I'm going out to dinner tonight. I'm sure I'll be going to a restaurant next week until there's general community spread. Timing does matter.
Would you go to a movie theater, John?
No, I wouldn't go to a movie theater.
Yeah.
I mean, this is. Last night I had a epidemiologist Skype into my class at LSU, and he was the TB czar for city of Philadelphia. So a pulmonologist is, it said the same thing he did. He said there's a Chinese. A lot of times public restrooms, or it was a Chinese restaurant, people would be sick and it'd go cough in the public restroom. And, that is a piece of advice that y'all both wholeheartedly agree on. And to all of our listeners, if you gotta go, you gotta go. But man, clean yourself like you never cleaned yourself before when you do. That'd be my counsel based on you and Bruce Davidson. So, John, before we go, of course, in addition to the great influenza, John wrote a book that I assigned to every class I've had called Rising Tide, which is a story about the 1927 floods, but about so much more. But I want to take a little time for a little levity here. You have a background in football. Why don't you share with Mr. Hunt and our listeners your career in football?
Well, I sat on the bench at Brown.
Okay.
and since we were a poor team and I sat on the bench and I love football, I wanted to get it out of I didn't want to leave the game that way. So I coached for a few years, and I did end up coaching at Tulane when Tulane still played they have a pretty decent schedule now, but back then we played 6 ACC teams and 3 SEC teams. We were ranked number 11. We beat number 5 ranked LSU team 14-0 before what was then the largest crowd ever to watch a football game in the South. And every time I see James, well, I don't have to remind him about that. He remembers.
I was on the sideline for that.
I still think that's the most important thing I've ever done. Steve, part of that staff.
Hey, John, didn't Bill Belichick go to Brown?
No, he went to Wesleyan.
Wesleyan, that's right. Well, I confuse all those elitist schools up there with the. I did a profile of a guy. You may have known. I don't know if you ever knew Kirk O'Donnell when you were working on your Jim Wright book.
And I were teammates, classmates. I loved Kirk. He was a very close friend.
He was a great. I did a profile of Kirk O'Donnell once, and I referred to him as a Brown football star, which of course is an oxymoron. And I think that's probably true.
Well, Kirk played more than I did, but I'm not sure that he. To tell the truth, I don't think he started, but I might be mistaken on that. But he was better than I was.
Well, he was one of my favorite people of all times. A great
everyone loved Kirk, and it was a great loss.
You have been one of our favorite guests of all times, John. I mean,
one of my favorite. I'll tell you, one of my favorite. The gutsiest guy that I've ever known in my life.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And next time I see you in Starbucks in Washington, I'll introduce myself.
Well, yeah, do that. But we know I saw you years ago when you were working on that Wright book. But also, as I say, I'm not great in the morning, so when I'm wearing that Dirty Pen sweatshirt, please just hit me. But thank you very much, and I hope all of our listeners, James, you put it perfectly. They'll listen to the advice that John gave. Wash your hands carefully if you can avoid public restrooms, and as much as I love movies, stay away from movies and ball games.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've gotten some really good, practical, doable advice, and all you can do is reduce your risk. Right. I'm glad to say that he thinks it's okay to go out in New Orleans because I'm going to lunch today, but I think I'm packing up and going to Mississippi.
Well, maybe in a few weeks I won't, but
right. I understand.
Again, timing is everything. Right now there are 6 cases in the state. There are probably more than that, but it's not like there are hundreds or thousands. So, I intend to live my life, but I'm not going to do anything stupid,
Well, despite the bad, this is a very scary time. But John, you have enlightened us. Thank you again. And as this progresses, I hope, if possible, you'll come on again.
Sure. Okay. Good to talk to you.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you. This means a lot. It really does. This is a big, big moment for our show.
Thank you.
Okay, James Carville. We did okay for 2 old guys today.
Yeah, some people don't disappoint.
Right. Yeah. And I could have listened to him for another hour.
Yeah, his knowledge of this stuff is just encyclopedic.
Yeah, it is. Well, as is yours of American politics, which we will still have a lot to talk about next week. So I want to thank everyone for listening to 2020 Politics War Room. Please subscribe, rate, and review, be charitable again, the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. For James Carville, I'm Al Hunt. We'll talk to you next week.